Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Rich, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. I think you know why I brought you on here because you happened to drop some info on me that I was not pertinent to about the Kennedy assassination. But it's a pleasure to have you back, man.
Pleasure's all mine.
I got to ask, when you first got into researching the Kennedy assassination, I'm sure you touched on the basic stuff. I mean, all the info that I know now or what I was exposed to probably wasn't available for you, but there's a lot of things in the Kennedy assassination, things you can agree with and things you can disagree with. Can you let me know the things that you disagree with?
Oh God. I try not to think about this stuff I disagree with, but the first thing that comes to mind is something we were just texting about. Um, you know, Judith Mary Baker. Yes, I've been to her conferences. She would she would invite me. Mainly, it was during a period when uh, I was having to defend Nathan Darby's fingerprint match against people who were trying to trash him and trash the match. People I had worked with and tried to give them the facts about that, but they wouldn't listen. They wrote a book about it, and I had to critique the chapter. And that's on YouTube. You can find that. So, well, first of all, okay, let's just say I disagree with Joan Mellon and her book, Faustian Bargains, especially chapter 17, the fingerprints. And you can see that whole speech I gave on YouTube.
Mac Wallace's fingerprints, correct?
Mac Wallace's fingerprints, which were matched by three different certified print examiners. The only one who would go on record was Nathan Darby. And so Joan Mellon gets some guy in Colorado to say it wasn't a match, but that's not what he said. She made up what his report actually said. And I read the report, which she was kindly published in her book. Read the report. What she says about the report makes it. So, anyway, we weren't going to get into that today, the fingerprints, but I totally disagree with Joan Mellon. And I disagree with anybody that has reviewed her book and agrees with it.
Well, what's the controversy behind Darby and the fingerprints?
Well, Joan Mellon, well, they immediately tried to start saying that he didn't keep up his certification as a print examiner. He was in his 80s when we were dealing with him on this, and uh, he was retired, of course, from the Austin Police Department. He was living with his son, who was a preacher in Austin, in South Austin. And my friend Dawn Meredith was his neighbor. She lived like a block from him, and and knew him pretty well. His son said that he always, and we'll say to this day, if you talk to him, he will say to this day that he never neglected keeping his certification up to date. He was proud of his certification. He was one of the best print examiners in the world by that point. And but he wasn't working, but he would take jobs if you like tracked him down and said, would you match? Would you take a look at his fingerprints? He would gladly do that. And he did it for Jay Harrison and made the match. And you can see that on the Man Who Killed Kennedy, um, chapter 9. And he's honest, straightforward in that video of him and the Man Who Killed Kennedy. He's exactly the way I knew him. And I later sat down with him at Dawn's house, and I had found more points of match. Of course, I'm an amateur, so it was kind of a thrill for me to sit down with the great Nathan Darby. And he had made more matches, and he had his chart. I had my chart. We sat down, we started looking at our charts, and I had found several of the same points of match that he had found after the fact. He eventually, it was up to 34 at that point. It may have gotten to more after that. Anyway, he was certified, and John Mellon tried to say that he wasn't, based on, and this happened almost immediately. This happened like right after we had the press conference in 1998. Um, I actually called up the institution that certifies print examiners and asked them, because a researcher had called me and said there's a question about his certification. So I called him up and asked him if Nathan Darby was certified. And he said he'd have to get back to me and have to look. He said those records are before digital. He'd have to go through the files. I said, fine, yeah, give me a call whenever you find anything. And he went through it, and it was just he couldn't. He said he couldn't find anything on it. So I had to let that go. Jones says that they had a note in his file. This was years later. This was like just before a book came out a few years ago. It was 2016 when I gave it. Yeah, it was 2016. Her book came out. And she contacted him, and they said they found a note in his file that said that he hadn't kept his certification up to date, blah, blah, blah. Which really doesn't matter because if you lose your driver's license, you still know how to drive. Uh, so that's a ridiculous argument to begin with, but he kept his certification up to date. He was adamant about it. And he was as good as he ever was. You can see how sharp he was in that episode of The Man Who Killed Kennedy. So now, Joan Mellon's book, oh, and she was wrong on a lot of stuff.
We don't talk trash on them the whole time, but the whole point is the fact that that would lead back to Johnson possibly being one of the main people behind the plot because Mac Wallace was his friend and so-called hitman.
The point isn't that it would. The point is that it does. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Johnson was in on the plot, the actual planning of the plot, as we discussed in our shorts and stuff, which we're going to get into Connally, so we'll do that. But so Joan in her and in the rest of her book, she makes she makes Mac Wallace out to be, oh, he had some problems, but he was a great guy, and blah blah blah. And so she tries to erase all of that history and defend Mac Wallace. Not totally, he was a jerk, and he's a bad guy. He killed a guy in cold blood. But to try to resurrect a guy like that at all, and to try to erase his possible role in the Kennedy assassination. Now, a lot of people get confused about my position on that. That I want to make this clear. We can move on. The fingerprint on that box, you would think it meant he was up there. Now, he very well could be. Some people wrote a book called The Man on the Sixth Floor. And the latest edition of that, the final edition of that, they got it right. They started out, they had a couple of cops in San Diego that weren't certified print examiners, first of all, but that's the way police departments usually did it. The fingerprint identification was a mess in police departments back then, and probably still is. But they would get like uncertified people. They would do some studying on it, and they'd be like me. They'd be an amateur. But I'm an artist. I have a visual brain. I'm trained to see things that most people can't see. And so I knew that I had a good chance of being able to see points of match when I read, the basic drill on how to do fingerprint matches. I understood that. Then, because I've said this before, I had to, before I was going to get involved with Jay Harrison and Nathan Darby on this, I didn't even know who Nathan Darby was at the beginning. Just Jay Harrison told me he had a guy who did the fingerprint match. Here's the charts he did. And so the first thing I did was by that time I was already studying the FBI manual on fingerprints science. And so I went over it myself from scratch. And I was able to see those points of match. So that was good news for me. If I had found that I couldn't agree with those points of match, even though I'm an amateur and he's a professional, if I'd found that I couldn't see those or couldn't agree with them, I would have stepped out. I would not have been involved in it at all. But it was the opposite. I saw the match, and to this day, you can say whatever you want to about the fingerprints and about Nathan Darby, but the guy made the match. And then, like I said, years later, I met with him and followed up on all this. And the guy was just a straight arrow, one of the old tough guys. I don't know how many old guys you knew. I'm 40 years. Wait, am I 40 years? Yeah, I'm 40 years older than you. He was 40 years older than me. And he was like my dad. He was one of those old World War II, Korean War tough guys.
Well, since we first talked, you mentioned some things, but then where you're at now, at least from when we discussed some off-air recordings about stuff where I got interested in looking into Mac Wallace and things of this sort, these were never mentioned to me when I was first learning the assassination, which goes back to my initial question, which was where did your, I guess, what you thought you couldn't agree with, you ended up starting to agree with? I mean, there's a lot of things. Like I never, everyone told me in the beginning, don't say LBJ did it. Even you were the one telling me that ducking down in the car does not mean anything. Could have been checking his radio or he forgot his notes or something like that. And then when we did the recording for the shorts, you were more in line with the opposite, that Johnson was in on it. He might not have pulled the trigger or anything like that, but he was a part of the cover up, which I think we can all agree with. But he was more of a conspirator than you might have let on to me in the beginning. So I was wondering when that shift happened, or do you feel like there's only a certain point that you have a little bit of information you can give people, and then there's the super in-depth connections, which are everywhere, that eventually you look into and you start realizing that those start to make sense too?
Yeah, I read the series of books, um, starting with Path to Power. Um, can't remember that guy's name right now, but and people have taken that too far, calling Johnson the mastermind of the assassination. That's nonsense. And they've backtracked on that, by the way. You have to. If you make a ridiculous statement like that, you have to backtrack it. Um, Johnson was a bad guy. He was a pure evil politician, and he wanted to be president more than anyone else. But he needed plausible deniability. He's going to be your replacement, and they couldn't. I came to this realization that the assassination could not have been done. They would have done it totally differently, maybe secretly, whatever. There's 100 ways they could have killed him, not in public and not by shooting him down on a public street.
Slip poison into his coffee.
Yeah, yeah. And other presidents, if you read my book, you'll see that there's at least 5 other presidents who were killed that way. 5 of our presidents in this country. Uh, But of course, they covered up the real cause, and it's amazing that even in this day, some of those causes of death are indefinite. They had to exhume Zachary Taylor, President Zachary Taylor, because suspicions keep arising that he was poisoned with what was it, arsenic, and they did find arsenic in his system, but it was inconclusive. They said it was inconclusive. But I go through the stories of several other presidential deaths that were suspicious. And there's several, and there's some, and besides the deaths, there are also illnesses. You can even find stuff on FDR's death, Franklin Roosevelt's death. Um, so yeah, I think they've been killing presidents for a long time, but they never did it this way. I mean, they tried to kill candidate Teddy Roosevelt.
We'll stick with JFK for this episode would be fantastic.
Okay, but other presidents have there have been attempted assassinations and actual assassinations that were covered up successfully. So Johnson was the replacement, and you can't have a direct path between Johnson and your conspiracy planners, your top planners. The connections are there. He was buddies with all of them. He knew what was going to happen, and he knew he was going to be the president. There, I'm convinced that there were several plots as early as 1960, as early as the time of the convention. Johnson was running against Kennedy in 1960, and he was obsessed with being president, and he hated the Kennedys even from that time. And Nixon was running as a Republican, and Nixon and Johnson, had a friendship, and they helped each other out as much as they could. And uh, so they had dirt on Kennedy. They knew about his medical history, and they knew that. And back then, you definitely had to keep any medical history you had secret. And Kennedy was doing that because he had to, appear to be a vital, young man running for president. And they used his medical history. That's what they used to get Johnson on the ticket at the convention. But why would Johnson? Even straight mainstream historians have asked, why did Johnson want to? Johnson didn't want to be vice president. Why did he do that? And why would they go as far as blackmailing the Kennedys to get him on a ticket? It's because they knew that Kennedy might not survive, even without killing him. They knew he might not survive, you know, the presidency. They didn't know if he was going to do one term or two terms or whatever. They knew he was pretty sick, and he didn't. He could. So that was one pathway to the presidency. Johnson did that as a pathway to the presidency, an easy one. Vice presidents are guys who are unelectable. I did this whole thing about unelectable um, politicians who get the presidency by going in through the vice presidency, and that's happened many times. Um, we have a guy as president now who he couldn't get elected until 2020. You look at who he was running against. Uh, so they do that. And he was vice president for Obama, President Biden. Um, so it is a path, to the presidency. And so Johnson knew that. But even back then, I think that there were plots among Kennedy's enemies in politics. There were plots that developed certainly by 62, because the word was on the street and mafia towns and mob towns that Kennedy there was a hit put out on Kennedy. These were not all necessarily one single. We tend to think about the conspiracy against Kennedy as monolithic. There were other plots, even within this plot, the official CIA deep state plot. There were other attempts that were planned, Chicago, Tampa, but there were outsider plots as well. And despite just the crazies that are out there that are always plotting against presidents, there were the mafia. They Jimmy Hoffa hated them. Carlos Marcello. The people who have written about those plots, those were real plots, and they may not have even known, even though they had worked with the CIA, they may not have even known about the CIA's plot. Chances are they didn't. They were making their own plot. John Birch Society people, uh, anti-Castro Cubans, they all had their own outsider plots. But at some point, either they got word from the CIA or they realized that, there's only one plot that's going to happen here, and that's Allen Dulles' plot. So they either brought them in to their plot or they stepped out. And they used elements of the mafia and the anti-Castro Cubans and the ZR rifle executive action program, which they had developed. There's a guy who gave a conference talk that really convinced me a few years ago. The one in Alexandria. Um, and he said that the whole plot against Castro, the executive action plot, all those attempts against Castro were practice and training and a way to cover a domestic assassination capability. They were training and planning for the hit against Kennedy, but they were using attempts against Castro as the cover for that. If they had wanted to kill Castro, don't you think they could have killed Fidel Castro if they'd wanted to?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
probably could have launched a missile at him.
Castro died of old age because there was never a serious attempt to kill him. It was a cover. This speech this guy gave convinced me that it was a cover for the executive action program against Kennedy. And so you'll find a lot in the literature will say, well, there was that plot against Castro, but it got turned around. They turned it around against Kennedy. Now, it was always intended against Kennedy. The Castro thing was a cover story. Um, Johnson knew about all that. Johnson was getting secret intelligence from Vietnam that Kennedy wasn't getting. John Newman found out all that. And and so Johnson wanted Kennedy dead. He knew that there were plots that were going to happen, but he had to keep out of the details. And even what Connally was doing, Connally was an active conspirator on the ground plotting at least since April and of '63 to get that to get Kennedy into the kill zone in Dallas. Since April, he had since April to do it, and you can track him the whole year. And George Michael Evica did that fantastic workshop, which I got the tape of afterwards and transcribed it. And that's all I know about the whole Connally thing. But even if it's Johnson's buddy Connally, uh, Johnson didn't sit down with Connally and go through the details of any of that. They knew they had to keep Johnson out of it so he could survive as your replacement so that he could manage the cover up. And so, yeah, he was a conspirator, but he wasn't actively planning the shooting like other people were.
Well, how
So,
far back does that relationship between Connolly and Johnson go?
oh yeah, back to I think back to the '30s. Um, yeah, so a long time.
Like old military buddies, live by each other, what?
Oh, you know what? I think yeah, I think they were both in the Navy, but I'm not clear. That's going to be in I'm still not thinking of his name. The guy who wrote a series of books on and still writing them, by the way, series of books on Johnson.
Well, who's the person that got Kennedy sucked into going to Dallas?
Um, Interesting story. I wrote extensively about that. Um, it was a bunch of Connally guys that started the ball rolling on that. They knew an election year was coming up. Uh, they knew that Kennedy was going to be campaigning around the country. They knew, but he had a thick schedule. Presidents always do. They needed a way to get him to Dallas. Something that he couldn't say no to. So there's this group in Texas called the Sons of the Republic of Texas. There's also the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. You have to be related to people who were here at the time of the Texas Revolution in order to be in the Sons or the Daughters of the Republic of Texas and the Republic era after that. For 10 years, we were our own country. And I don't go back that far. Yeah, for me, I'd have to go back one more generation. I'm a seventh generation Texan. So I didn't quite make it, but I'm kind of glad I did after I learned that. But it's not the sons or the daughters of the Republic of Texas that are the bad guys here. It's a subgroup within the Sons of the Republic of Texas called um, the Knights of San Jacinto. And so those guys meet every year at the anniversary of the Battle of San Jacinto, April 21st, the closest weekend to it, as their annual meeting. Now, in '63, there were guys on there who, some of them turned out to be some of the bad guys and all this. Johnson people, Connally people were on it. And they got together and they said, okay, we got to get Kennedy to Texas. What would he not say no to? So Kennedy had this buddy in Congress, Albert Thomas, congressman from Houston. And supposedly Kennedy loved um, uh, Albert Thomas. And supposedly Thomas loved Kennedy. So they were probably, for Thomas anyway, they were pretend friends, obviously. But Kennedy was probably, I don't know if he was fooled by it, but they were buddies. But Thomas was also buddies with Connally and Johnson and all the powers that be in Texas. And so they were starting to get NASA up and rolling, the Johnson Space Center, and Albert Thomas was their guy in Houston who was going to be able to arrange the votes to get the Johnson Space Center going in Houston. And this was one of Kennedy's priorities was the Space Center. And so they said, well, okay, Albert Thomas comes down with cancer. He's dying. We want to let's have a tribute dinner for him. And we'll invite Kennedy, and Kennedy won't say no to that. So they arrange a dinner in Houston for, guess what? And this is April. This is like around April 21st. It's like third week of April of '63. Let's have it on November 21st of '63. So that date, and so they met. They agreed. Yes, we're going to have the dinner for Albert Thomas. And while he's here, of course, instead of just having one stop in Houston, let's add Dallas to it. So you had Dallas and you had November 21st set, third week of April 1963. I credit George Michael Evica with tracking all this down. It's an incredible workshop that he did. Detail. He never wrote about it. It never ended up in a book by George Michael Evica. And his notes on it, I don't know where his notes are, but they're somewhere. His family has them. I haven't seen. I would love to see his detailed notes on all this, and I'd like to continue that research if it needs to be continued. But all I have is his workshop, and that was detailed enough. That was plenty detailed enough to nail this down. So these were all friends of Connally, and one of the guys was Jack Valenti, if you know that guy. Researchers do, and he and Bill Moyers were in on getting The Men Who Killed Kennedy 9-part series canceled from the History Channel. They and some other Johnson family cronies and members came down on the History Channel hard and said, we will put you out of business faster than anything if you don't cancel that show. And so they did. They went along, and of course they took the opportunity to ridicule everybody that was in the show. And so that was Jack Valenti, and he became head of Warner Brothers Studios in Hollywood with the help of his political buddies.
Try and bring you on track back here to the JFK stuff. But when we talk about November 21st and the party, was that November 21st that they all went there? And did Johnson go to that party as well, too? Because I don't believe the Clinton Murchison party happened. But just because we don't have any photos, video, anything like that, we just got one person who you take your testimony for what you want. I mean, I don't know if you agree with the Clinton Murchison stuff. I just think a lot of people, when it comes to the assassination, you can look for motive and means, and a lot of people gained a lot after Kennedy's assassination. Not just Allen Dulles, not just Johnson. Harold Byrd got something out of it. Everyone got something. But Connally was the only one that he might have agreed with the official narrative, but he also threw in that bombshell of the bullet that hit Kennedy did not hit me. It's not the same bullet.
Yeah, the Murchison party, it's a bit of a mess. It's not something I've really dug into, but like everything else with this, if you do dig far enough into it, and it takes some time because it's a lot of disinformation's been mixed in with it. You can come to a conclusion, and I lean towards the party actually happening.
Okay.
There are a few tidbits of information there that are pretty solid, witness testimonies and stuff that said it happened. Exactly where is messy in my mind. People have tried to say that the house they say it was in wasn't Murchison. Either he didn't own it or he wasn't living there at the time or whatever. None of that really matters anyway because they can have the party anywhere they want to. These are the most powerful men in the country. So yeah, I think somehow probably that party did happen. I don't spend a lot of time on it because a lot of these iffy things, I hope to get around to really nailing down these things in my mind. but I've nailed down so many other things. I don't need to prove to myself that it was a conspiracy. I don't need to prove to myself who did it anymore. That's all just peripheral stuff that, you know, long ago, this stopped being a parlor game for me. For a lot of people, they just love to fill in the more and more details. And the details that they can't fill in with facts, they'll just make something up and pretend they have the facts to it. It's a parlor game. I put all that away a long time ago. That's toys, that's games. My focus is on stopping the lies. The lies we know about, we can stop those. We can stop them anytime we want to. So my focus is on, because once we stop the lies, the rest of it will come out automatically. Imagine living in a world where, the government admits it was, post disclosure, government admits, yeah, it was a conspiracy. The government was involved in a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. You can't just say that and then go about your business as usual.
No, they publish it on the website and don't tell anybody about it.
No, yeah, but once they tell everybody about it, it's like, how do you live with that? You can't live with that. It's massive criminality by the United States government. It would affect our world standing. It already does, but it's not official yet. Once it becomes official, you have to deal with it. You have to. It has to be a top priority.
Would it be that much of a shocker, as much as we've known about our government now, that you can see through history that they influence media? I mean, it's completely ruined free press, the idea of free press from media influence for covert operations, whether it's CIA or FBI. Movies are influenced. I mean, the amount that we do know about even like assassination plots on foreign leaders and also domestic programs as well, too, like COINTELPRO. It's not that much of a shock for people to get that. I don't think it's going to have the impact when it finally does get released. I think it's just this long-standing debate might possibly be over with. But even then, I think people will still fight teeth and nail all the way down to the end on who individual people that were involved in it.
Yeah, but the gaming is a lot more active in a world where the official position is that Oswald acted alone. In a world where the official position is that Oswald didn't do any shooting and other people did the shooting and they were connected to the Pentagon, in that world, things have to be resolved. Things have to be settled. People have to be prosecuted posthumously. Even you're down to Nazi hunting at that point. They spent decades. There are still some very young guys who were like in their teens working in the death camps that are still being tracked down, and some of them caught and prosecuted, even in recent years. It's got to be a deal like that where every family, even who had ancestors that were involved in Kennedy's assassination, they have to take over the stigma that the Oswald family has had to live with. And he has two grandsons now. And last I heard, they're living in Austin. They were going to college. Um, Imagine their life. Imagine their mom's life, Rachel Oswald. She's a nurse somewhere. She married a doctor. I had some like indirect contact with her back after the Oliver Stone film came out. She was a waitress at a at the Texas Chili Parlor downtown Austin, which is still there. Still looks the same as it did back then too. And I would go there, have a bowl of chili, and she would be my waitress. She looked she looked just like her dad. Man, there was no doubt. Anyway, so I tried to keep tabs on her after she graduated from nursing school, and anyway, she ended up with two boys, and I heard in the recent years that they were in college. That family has had to live through this stigma. Of course, they have their own issues. I mean, uh, they were Oswald was a spy kid. So were his brothers. They were spy kids. Their mom was a spy. The John Armstrong in the book Harvey and Lee fleshed all this out. And a lot of people disagree with Harvey and Lee, but yeah, good luck with that. That's like bringing down Mount Everest.
I just don't believe there were two people with identical faces walking around calling themselves Lee Harvey Oswald. I do believe someone was using his name. but I don't think you can use the. I know he was missing a tooth in high school. I mean, but his teeth were in crappy condition as it is. I just don't use that as evidence. You look at a podcast of me 2 years ago, my jaw looks completely different. So I mean, it could be angles, it could be some of that, but I do think someone was using his name, going to a firing range and doing things of that sort. I just don't necessarily believe the two identical face-like structures, or how there's a drastic change in weight. I mean, that can be from not eating, that could be from a simple thing that could be fixed in a couple of months.
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time debating. First of all, I don't spend a lot of time debating photographs. Yeah, I know the Zapruder film is altered, but you, you can't really argue that with people because um, you have to be able to think visually. And there's a huge difference. People don't even know the difference. I tell doctors and lawyers all the time, you wouldn't last one semester in art school, the kind of art school I went to. And I didn't even go to the best. I went to the University of Texas Art School. But you go to somewhere like Pratt, an art center in California, man, people just the average person just doesn't know it is like medical school, it is like law school, but for visual thinking, and doctors and lawyers wouldn't last one semester in a school like that.
Well, where would you pick your points that you would stick to if you're going to mention about certain topics? Like if I asked you to Zapruder film, would you go into it being altered? Like how would you pitch someone that doesn't know anything about the Zapruder film?
You know, when I nail something down and it's something I can stick to and stand by, I write it down. And I wrote a very short little essay called Z Film, Red Frame, White Light. And I stand by what I said in that. And nobody has knocked it down yet. A lot of people have read it. People who didn't think the film was altered have read it and come away saying, damn, you're right. Film was altered. What's up with Grodin? You know, I don't get into that either because I've I've had I've had a friendship with Grodin. Um, yeah, Larry Howard. At the time they were filming Oliver Stone's movie in Dallas, I knew Larry Howard and Gary Shaw from those days, and I went up there to kind of see if I could catch a glimpse of the filming in Dealey Plaza, and I did, yeah, big time. That's one of my great stories about the assassination. But Larry Howard introduced me to Grodin. That's when I first met Bob Grodin, and then he introduced me to the guy playing Zapruder and all that. So, and then at conferences and stuff, I would end up at a table eating dinner with Bob Bob Grodin on my left and Judith Baker across the table from me. I would just get quiet and listen to them talk, and I would learn so much, just the history, the insider stuff of the relationships between researchers and stuff. So, I've never had that argument with Bob Grodin, uh, but I stand by what I wrote. It's like a little three-page essay, and it's all about one frame of film. If you can prove one frame of film was altered, then that's it. It's an altered film.
Well, do you need to even go into alteration on it, but just be like, we're basing a lot of the basis of the whole shots, how many shots were fired off reactions of a silent film? That's the best point you can do. The same thing with like the Warren Commission investigation. At the ending on their first page on the National Archives, it says the summary of the Warren Commission's findings based on the evidence that Oswald was the shooter. They're not looking at anybody else. They're just looking on that. That's your best point to say it's not a real investigation. There's a lot of fringe stuff people go into, and like I get everybody's got their own theories, but if you're going to pitch somebody, like I tossed you out like 10 different topics right now, you got to have points to every strong argument on that. The HSCA's investigation, even pointing at the mob, there was 5 different things about mob figures that they should have chased down. Jimmy Hoffa's comments about JFK wanting him dead, Traficante's comments, Carlos Marcello. There was a lot of things that weren't pursued by these official investigations where it should just raise flags to anybody. And everyone loves true crime. It's all about trying to solve the mystery. And this is just one that we don't know because of the fact that there was not a proper investigation done. A point you mentioned to me when we were recording the shorts, a blood pool in Dealey Plaza, person being brought to the hospital. I can't find the doctor's statement or testimony, but I see the picture of the pool of blood and people looking at it, wondering what that was. So obviously something did happen, but was that pursued or was that followed up with? Any investigation? No.
You know what they called it? the cover story for that was that, oh, that was a melted red snow cone,
Makes sense.
or a bottle of red pop that spilled or something. Uh, yeah, until you read Bertha Lozano's deposition in the Warren Commission report, in the Warren Commission volumes. It's buried way down at the end, like volume 26 or something. Bertha Lozano was a reception nurse at emergency that day, and she her deposition is all about just this one thing that she saw. She witnessed. She was there. She checked them in. Two guys in suits bring in an unconscious guy bleeding profusely in a suit, and she checks him into emergency, and she never sees or hears anything about it again after that. And there were reports on the ground at the time they brought him in. There were reports already in the media that a Secret Service agent had been shot in Dealey Plaza. So you have that. You have the pool of blood there, directly in the line of fire. That pool of blood is in the line of fire of the shots coming from, you know, behind the fence and stuff. Where they were saying people were shooting behind the tree. Behind, Zapruder said he he felt, a bullet whiz past him. Bill Newman, said he felt a bullet go right past his ear. It's coming from behind him. And so, totally believable. You put all the evidence together, you have to consider all the evidence. It has to have explanatory power. A melted snow cone has no explanatory power. You got to stick to evidence and explanatory power for if you're going to be scientific, if you're going to think critically. So you put all that together. A melted snow cone doesn't, and the reports getting into the media about someone shot in Dealey Plaza with Bertha Lozano's deposition in the Warren volumes. Snow cone doesn't cover it. Doesn't cover all the.
Did you
It's got
find it?
the explanation.
Did you find it interesting that I don't know if it's the HSCA, but they put an actual report out there about the allegations that there was a Secret Service member on the knoll. They just came up with inconclusive evidence to support any findings of a Secret Service member being up there on that knoll. But one thing they did add, which was my theory, if you look at the CIA's charter, the little manual thing that they have, they can offer members of the CIA to the Secret Service to make sure they can fulfill their duty properly. And I said, well, they're not lying when they said there's not a Secret Service agent up there. But imagine if he was CIA using Secret Service credentials for the trip. That's in the HSCA report. They talked about that. It says there in a little section, they did not pursue any leads on a Central Intelligence agent being used by the Secret Service. So there, like I said, there's not follow-up stuff, but I've seen people try and debunk that there was anybody up there on that knoll because it comes from either Roger Craig or someone like that. But there's like 6 or 7 different people that gave statements when they investigated it. They just came up with inconclusive evidence to support it. So who left the motorcade, if any Secret Service members did leave the motorcade?
Yeah, yeah. If nobody left the motorcade. Yeah, there were no Secret Service. There was a Secret Service detail in Dallas, and they were with Kennedy the whole time. They were on the motorcade. Um, so yeah, and officially there were no Secret Service agents on the ground, and CIA could make whatever credentials they want. You know, they had they had CIA agents with press credentials all over the country and in other countries, so they can do whatever they want. Uh, but of course, it has to be debunked. Anything that has to do with the actual conspiracy has to be debunked, and that's the whole history of the case right there. But you can use that as a negative barometer. If something is being debunked big time, then you can like use that as evidence that it was that's good evidence that it was real. If these guys are debunking it, it's got to be real. And then you look for the evidence for it and you find it. You know, the 26 volumes. I don't even know. You probably haven't even read the Warren report, but the Warren report just lied.
It's like 600 pages, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's a lot of crap in there. Oswald's biography, Ruby's biography, um, but then they have footnotes here and there. But when you start looking at the footnotes that refer you to the volumes or refer you to the documents, you'll go and you'll see that there's no document there. And this document has nothing to do with what that paragraph said in the Warren report. And I discovered that with the clip. I tried to find every source they said for their claim that when the rifle was found, it contained a clip. You know what I found? Nada, zilch, bupkis. The footnote led nowhere. They had no basis to say that when the rifle was found, it contained a clip. Of course, they had to say that. They had to debunk that there was no clip there because when by the time it left the building, there was a clip stuck in it. Not only, it was stuck because you could see the bottom of it hanging out. If you've ever worked with that rifle, you know that clip, if you don't have that spring catch in place, that clip will just fall right through. It's just like a metal rectangular thing in the middle of the, trigger guard, and an empty clip will just fall right through it. And you put some bullets in there, and you use a bolt action, you load the last round. That clip, the spring action, flies that clip out of that gun. And the only way it would get stuck, the HSEA had to come up with this explanation because it's obvious it was on the news film. I wrote my explanations for why all this happened and what they were doing. And it was a big mistake. The whole thing was damage control. They should not have put that clip. They would have been golden if they hadn't gone out and gotten a clip and made sure that the press people saw it as they brought it out of the building, because there was no reason for the clip to be there. But they thought that it did have to be there, and they went and got one. They stuck it in there and put on a big show of it being there. And then they had to explain that away. And it came down to the HSCA years and years later, 13 years later, to explain that. And the way they explained it was they said the clip was bent. They said if you like bent, it's just like thin metal. You flay the edges out, you can make it stick in. That's the only way you can make it stick in there. But if the edges were bent out, Oswald Oswald didn't empty the clip and bend it out and stick it in there. It was bent the whole time. And if you flay the edges out, there's like these little flanges on the side that hold the cartridges in, and the cartridges won't stay in. The cartridges will just like jumble around, and it'll jam the weapon. You can't fire the weapon with a bent clip, but you can make it stick in the bottom with a bent clip, and that's what they explained. But
well, who really solidified Oswald's guilt in the whole matter? Do you believe that it was Marina and Ruth Payne?
Ruth Payne was so heavily responsible for making Oswald look guilty.
She definitely had to check that blanket at some point. The fact that she stated that she never bothered to look in it.
I mean, I was reading about that recently, and I came across this analysis, about Michael Payne had been in that garage at the time the Oswald stuff was in there.
Did you watch my short on that?
That's probably where I heard it.
Yeah, that's where you heard it.
They said that there's no way he walked over that blanket and didn't know that was the shape of a gun in that blanket that Michael Payne.
Well, he said it was heavy camping equipment, like the old school heavy camping equipment when he was a kid, which doesn't make sense because I'm pretty sure they probably would have updated their camping equipment. How does this guy who just came from Russia have this random heavy camping equipment?
Yeah. Debunking and negative barometer stuff again. You hear something ridiculous like that, they knew. You look at all the evidence of Ruth Payne. You look at Carol Hewitt and Steve Jones's research that they did on it in the 90s. It's all nailed down, and I can't wait. We're going to hear from Ruth Payne. She's going to be in Dallas at the 60th, and not involved in any of our stuff, but she's going to be there giving her official interviews and stuff. And so we're going to have her on the record again.
I don't think she's a willing conspirator. I think she's just doing it for attention, and she had been doing it for attention. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but when I see the interviews with her, she knows more probably than she's let on, but she likes the a limelight a little bit. I think Marina is kind of given the limelight that Ruth Payne wanted, especially after all this went down. That's why she's so willing to accept interviews that are with the official narrative, not really conspiratorial stuff. But I also don't agree, like George DeMorn. I don't know about George DeMornshield yet. His testimony kind of rebuts a lot of what the Warren Commission was trying to paint about Oswald. Oswald comes off as a wife beater, and I'm sure that happened. But also, if you listen to the DeMornshield statements about Marina, doesn't paint her in this sweet, innocent light either.
Well, it's like when we talk about the Murchison party, the way my brain has developed on all this is that I will say uh, I know enough few little pieces of evidence to say, yeah, probably there was a Murchison party. I don't know the details about it, but probably that's as far as I'll go. And I haven't written anything about it. I don't write about it until I can nail it and defend it from now on. You're still in an early mode where it sounds like the language you're using is, and I know that you're not doing this because you're very open-minded and you go wherever the evidence leads, I've noticed. But when you talk about it, you say, I think Ruth Payne was innocent. If you say something like that, don't say you think that. Say you don't know. You're leaning in that direction, but you don't know. And I can tell you for sure, you you learn even just as much as I know about Ruth Payne. Your mind will change. You will come around to
No,
see.
she's got some weird connections in her history. I'm not doubting that at all either, but I don't necessarily think this was some grand, like she was lying the whole time and doing all this type of stuff. I just think that I've looked at her original statements and things like that. She's defended Oswald on some accounts where I guess a lot of people would say that she's 100% against Oswald. Things that she could easily just lobbed up for certain people that were interviewing her during the Warren Commission, which they tossed her that question. Did he ever say he was a Trotskyite or whatever the hell? And no, never said that at all, never even any of that stuff. But she's also lying about certain things about Oswald's background, where I definitely think she wasn't as distant as she likes to say about with Oswald. I think she was definitely a little bit closer to Oswald.
Yeah, you're almost there. You're almost at the point where I am, where it's not that she's not lying, it's that she's a good liar. And look, CIA people are professional liars. That's what that job is. If you're CIA, you are a professional liar. The thing you know most in this world is how to be a good liar, to be a great liar, the best liar in the world. Oh my God. Did,
She's probably taking advice from Michael Payne on how to work some of this stuff out. I would be in more belief than that she's some massive secret agent.
yeah, Michael's is like this huge mystery still. We don't know nearly enough about Michael. And like we said when we were discussing the Rambler before, um, Oswald, it's in Fritz's notes that came out eventually that Oswald said that the Paynes owned two cars. I totally for if I ever knew that, I'd forgotten about it until recently. Uh, why they only found the light blue '55 Chevy in the parking lot when Ruth Payne was there, and they were separated. Michael Payne was living in Fort Worth uh, during their supposed separation. You can't believe anything the Paynes did or said. Um, and now we have Oswald saying they own two cars. So yeah, so there's a possibility for where a Payne Rambler could have been, but I don't know if anybody's done any research on what car Michael Payne was driving. Yeah, there's stuff still to learn, but I don't know if I want to spend. I don't.
Would you take it back? That's the real question. Would you take it back all the years you researched into the Kennedy assassination?
Of course not.
You could learn about birds or something.
Well, I do get away from it. You have to get away from it, like you do, and you even do it in your podcast. You go into all kinds of subjects, and that's the way you learn. They know enough about the brain now to know that if you want to really learn a couple of subjects, read 20 minutes of this book and then switch to a completely different book, or read 20 minutes of that book and then read 20 minutes of another book. Your brain absorbs it way better that way. You have to get away from it and then recall it later in order for it to like be solidly. Uh, that was a study tip I was reading about. I was updating my knowledge of study, how college students study, for example, and how the brain. There was a TED talk that went into all that, how the brain best studies material, and that's it. You have to have several subjects, and you have to go from one to the other, and then come back to them in order for your brain to really solidify that knowledge. So yeah, I have plenty of subjects. I've been studying quantum physics for 23 years. Not the math, not science, not as a scientist, but as pop science kind of a thing. And it fascinates me still. And I keep up with it.
Well, what do you feel like compared to what you felt like back when you first started researching the Kennedy assassination? You are any more hopeful? Do you feel any more like we've pushed steps forward?
The the thing is, we my frustration is that we feel like we have to keep digging. Now we don't have. It's not our job to figure this out. It's not our job to dig out every scrap. Now we've dug out a lot. We've spent the last 60 years digging all this out, and it's the private citizens that did most of that digging. It was never our job to do that. We have to stay focused on the fact that the government, our government is responsible for this. Our judicial system, our Congress, our executive branch, and especially the executive branch, because they're the ones who did it and covered it up. They're responsible. We need to take the battle to them. We always needed to take the battle to them, but they've always it's like Lucy Van Pelt in Peanuts, Lucy and the football and Charlie Brown. You know, we get all excited and we run up to kick the football, and Lucy always pulls it aside and we fall on our back every time. That is so true of the way the last 60 years have been with the research community. Uh, no, we need to grab Lucy and say, you know, like anchor her to the ground, anchor the football to the ground, and kick the damn football. You know, stop letting them like pull the football away and we fall flat on our back. They slap us in the face every time, every day. I call them slaps in the face every time I wake up and I hear something on the news that completely goes against everything that I've known and worked for the last 60 years. And the latest thing is our city council here in Austin is planning to rename our Austin's airport after LBJ. You know,
Well, they already remodeled Dealey Plaza, so
well, they have plans. They have architectural plans. Yeah,
even
Dallas.
fixing the fence is an issue.
Yeah, the plan. I've looked at the architectural plans on that. The plan is to erase the geography that's there today. You can go there today and get a sense of what happened. It's been preserved almost exactly in that one Dealey Plaza area. And you can see all the possible trajectories, and you can put yourself. I was talking about being there for the Oliver Stone film. At one point, they still had the 6-4 museum was open when Oliver Stone was filming those motorcade scenes in Dealey Plaza. And so I thought, you could only get so close. You could get to like the barricades and you could watch him filming and you could get pretty close, and they tried to run you away, especially if you had a camera like I did. They tried to run you away from the barricade. So I said, and you can't take your camera up to the 6th floor. But I thought, man, I can get a good look at what's going on with the filming from the 6th floor. So I bought my ticket. I went up to the 6th floor museum, and oh my God, I watched 3 takes of the motorcade filming from the 6th floor. And all the windows, I don't know if you probably haven't been up there, but it's a big space, and these big windows all the way around. You can stand there looking to the south, and you got windows all across the south side and the west side, and you can see everything. And I would just walk up and down and watch during the filming when he said action and everything was happening. I knew the details so well. I knew all the things that were supposed to be taking place everywhere. And even though the cameras weren't focused on it, there was everything that should have been happening in the back parking lot was happening. I walked over there during one of the takes, and concentrated on what was going on in the back parking lot. Everything that they knew to do, it was like going back in time. It was like being in the Twilight Zone. And then when that ended, I went down and out the building. He had called lunch, and the extras were just milling around down there on Elm Street. I walk out of that building and I felt like, oh my God, I've just gone back in time. It's like they were all in costume. It was like being in 63 on Elm Street right after the assassination. So that was a trip. Um, but so yeah, lost my track of thought there.
You're doing that a lot
But
this episode.
I know, well, that's the way my brain works. You're the director. You got to keep me in line.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Yeah,
Now,
but it's conversational. Like your podcast
yeah,
is conversational.
I like
Rich is
this,
good at, yeah, I like it too.
but
But
but I do got some questions we got to get to,
yeah,
which is
let's
the Warren Commission put out a crap ton of documentation. They a lot, like over excess and to things that have no relevant any information to the actual assassination. Jack Ruby's mother's dental records is in there. It makes it very, very difficult. And it's what I've been coming across as an issue now when I'm trying to find things that you guys mentioned. I know there was two people arrested in that theater. I know for a fact there was two people arrested in that theater. One was up in the balcony and one was, but I can't find that document anymore. And I think whatever they did when they put out 26 volumes and just put out a bunch of, and then the later investigations as well, too. There's so much out there that you have to screenshot every single thing you possibly can to be able to even understand if you, oh, I did see it. I know I saw a document that mentioned another person. You hear it in the police reports. The police reports, they talked about that he had a shotgun on him when they arrested him. I'm like, well, I don't remember Lee ever having a shotgun in evidence or anything like that. I thought it was just a pistol. Were they lying to make the story sound better? Sure. Or did someone have a shotgun? You know, there's a massive amount of confusion. And if you go to the Texas Theater, they have a little landmark on there that'll tell you this is where Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. And if you read it closely, it says arrested for killing the president. It doesn't say Officer Tippit. And that was a big thing that was raised to them about changing that. Even the Historical Society down there in Texas raised that issue and said he's not being charged for killing the president. He's being charged for killing Tippit. But it is, for my generation, it's a very serious issue. It's why I appreciate all the time all the researchers have given me to understand the situation. And I know it's hard. It's like teaching a toddler on it, but it's because of the fact we're so disconnected from that. And if we go and try and Google something right now, try and Google two Oswalds at Texas Theater on your phone, you're going to get a million other things that are newly declassified documents that have nothing to do with two Oswalds at a theater. It's just like there's nothing, the search engine doesn't even work properly for it.
You brought my brain back to where we were headed before with that Dallas City Council changing Dealey Plaza. They're trying to erase that geography so that you can't go and look and put yourself in that place. And they're trying to rename our airport after LBJ. Of course, we in Austin we deal with that constantly. The 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 honoring of Lyndon Johnson, and I live in a school district where they named a high school after John Connally. I'm gonna go after all this. The thing about that is we still have there's a plaque at the site at 10th and Patton where Tippit was shot that blames that on Oswald. At least if you're quoting the the theater thing correctly, at least they say he was charged with killing Tippit, which he was. But to say he killed Tippit, that's a whole different story. You can't prove that he killed Tippit. You can't even come close to proving he killed Tippit. So that, as far as politics and city councils, that has to be changed. Judith Baker years ago was like up in arms about getting that done, but that's got to be done politically at the city politics level. You can't just go out there and like hold signs and yell slogans to do that. Anyway, so there's that work. But once again, I come back to the solution is to force the government to admit that it was a conspiracy. Oswald had nothing to do with it. We resurrect the Oswald family, well, to the extent that we can, which is to not blame them for this. Remove that stigma for them, put the stigma on the families that deserve it, and including, Secret Service families and CIA families and political families the Connollys, the Johnsons, they have to have this stigma. Um, oh my God, an airport named after Allen. Well, not after Allen, but after John Foster Dulles. But any airport named after
That's
Dulles.
even worse.
The FBI headquarters in Washington D.C. named after J. Edgar Hoover. That should have been dismissed years ago. All this, but it will all think. You have to imagine this future where conspiracy is the official position, as much as they don't want it to be. It is, and it is official. They have to change. All of that has to change. All of that is that's the dominoes I'm talking about. You knock over that one domino, they all fall. You cannot keep you cannot keep a FBI building named after J. Edgar Hoover once it comes out that it was a conspiracy and Hoover was so responsible in covering up. You can't have the FBI building named after Hoover. You can't have an airport named after a Dulles. You can't have an airport named after, you can't have anything named after LBJ. So many things in Texas named after LBJ. The LBJ library at the University of Texas becomes a monument to evil. I mean, you could keep it, just tell the truth in it. You know, my sister-in-law is coming to town around the weekend before Thanksgiving, and she's never been to the LBJ library, and she wants to go to the LBJ library. But she's not like one of our crowd. She's like she goes. She's a politician. She was the mayor of Alexandria, Virginia. So she wants to go to the LBJ library to do what it's intended to do, and that's to like honor LBJ, and she'll have a good time there. I I grew up with the place. I went to school there, and at a time before I knew all about this. So yeah,
Really back into, would you place the blame at Earl Cabell's feet?
yeah, especially since we learned the documents came out that he was a contract CIA agent at the time. Um, there's a thing I want to write about the 62 election when he was elected mayor. There's a lot of people that got into power in Texas in the 62 election. Connally became governor. Everybody that was on the ground and did bad things at the time of the assassination, they brought in 62. Earl Cabell was one of them, and I knew a guy who I knew Earl Cabell. Speaking of my sister-in-law, it was like her family friends. I talked to the parents of their friends who knew Earl Cabell, and he said, the dad said, "Yeah, I knew Earl Cabell. That guy. He did not want to be mayor. Last thing his father had been mayor, his grandfather had been mayor of Dallas. He knew what it was about. He didn't want to be mayor. So why was he mayor? Why did he run? Why did he get elected? And he didn't enjoy it when he was there. It's something weird happened in that 62 election. They needed certain people in place in power for the assassination, and they got him in that election. And Earl Cabell was one of them. And of course, nobody knew he was a contract CIA agent. Hardly anybody knew that his brother was one of the three guys fired by Kennedy. He was deputy director of the CIA, Charles Cabell. And so, yeah,
Well, how much blame would you place on the secondary committee of the Warren Commission?
secondary committee.
The young team of lawyers that crafted out the Warren Commission basically and participated in probably more interviews than the actual members?
The top people, except for perhaps Dulles, they were figureheads, especially Warren. Warren came to regret and be ashamed of what the Warren Commission did. But it's the staff lawyers who were the real villains here. Arlen Specter. I've written extensively about Arlen Specter. David Bellin. Before there was a Gerald Posner, there was David Bellin. You had to, every anniversary, every time a book came out, it was David Bellin's face on TV debunking everything and ridiculing the conspiracy theorists. Um, and as those guys were getting old and going away, they had to get replacements for them. So they got young Posner and they financed his book and gave him access to CIA files, and he put out that big book of lies, book of big lies. Uh, Case closed. And yeah, they named it that on purpose. And yeah, yeah. But so they recruit new people. They are recruiting people in your generation right now to continue those lies. And so the goal is to stop the lies. You stop the lies, you stop their ability to lie, it all falls apart. Everything straightens out. We have to have reparations. The stigma is put where it belongs, and everything starts to make sense for everybody after that. Historians, mainstream historians, have to deal with it. If they don't, they lose their job. The way it is now is the way you keep your job as a historian is you avoid that subject or you go along with the Warren Commission.
It's not just that, it's the fact that they don't really explain what Kennedy's office role or what he did as president or was going to do at all in academic fields at all, because it leads to that conspiracy question. It leads to that big mystery of this giant grand conspiracy, and most academics will stay away from that. There's a large disconnect between covert operations and the academic community.
They stay away from it. It's called lying by omission. And that is one of the ways you become a great liar. So, CIA, the world's greatest liars, they're scared to death, though. If you saw the recent 60 Minutes interview with the Five Eyes, the top heads of intelligence of the five allied countries with the U.S., watch that 60 Minutes piece. The first time in history, they got the Five Eyes guys at one table. And of course, and what are they talking about? The threat of China. I tell you, after seeing that, I can tell you right now, what that says to me is that China has a quantum computer that can break every code. It's like the movie Sneakers has come to life. The Robert Redford movie Sneakers has come to life, where no more secrets. They have a machine that can crack every single code, and that's why they brought the Five Eyes on 60 Minutes to bash China, to say China is the biggest security threat in the universe right now. And that's what they did in that little 20-minute segment. And it's the idea was to scare us, not to give us the truth or the details. They avoided the truth, lying by omission. These are the greatest liars in the world, the Five Eye guys, the U.S. allies in intelligence. Um, and so they avoided the truth and they fear mongered, and they're setting us up for a big war with China. So, global politics. Oh, knock over that one. You resolve the Kennedy assassination. All of that goes away. You avoid all of that. Every issue that you're concentrated on now in the upcoming presidential campaign, whatever it is, global warming, the wars and rumors of wars, all of that goes away as soon as you resolve the Kennedy assassination. That's why it's, you know, I can't, it's so great to talk to you about all this because I can't talk to anybody about this in my daily life. They don't understand. They're so consumed by the 24-hour news cycle. And that's the purpose of it, is to keep them distracted. But I'm going to keep harping on it. That's my focus. I know I'm right about this. Knock over that one domino, everything changes. Nothing changes until you do that, until you resolve the Kennedy assassination. Like John Judge said, if you want a democracy, you got to resolve the Kennedy assassination. You'll see him say that in John Judge's movie, The Searchers. Fantastic documentary, the best documentary ever done on researchers. Randy, what did I say?
You said John Judge?
Randy Benson's documentary featuring John Judge. You'll hear John Judge say that in Randy Benson's documentary.
Could I ask you about Nixon?
Yeah, I know a little bit about Nixon.
Do you think he was involved in any way?
Yes, big time, big time. He was one of the top conspirators. Really good buddy of Allen Dulles. He was vice president during the Eisenhower administration, 8 years. It was like a done deal that he was going to become the president in 1960. But Joe Kennedy, old Joe Kennedy, the dad, was too smart for him, and It's like what I said, what modern elections started at that in 1960. Those shenanigans before that, but modern elections started in 1960 because at that point you knew Nixon was going to steal the election. Everybody in the know about the way presidential politics went knew Nixon was going to steal the election. So what all you can do is either steal it yourself or prevent the theft. And I don't know which one it was, but yeah, they prevented. And this never came out because you did not do this. It's totally different now when you contest an election or you say that the election was falsified. Back then, you did not do that. You lost all. You ruined your political career if you questioned the election. Nixon had to accept it, but he secretly had a recount done in Hawaii. It, yeah, I didn't either until a few years ago, and I discovered this. And they just add it to the column on Nixon's guilt side.
I know Nixon was funded by a lot of mob people, such names like and Sam Giancana. I mean, I believe that he did give $25,000 to the Kennedy side of things, but I think if you look at the Jimmy Hoffa gave him money, Howard Hughes gave him money, Nixon gave Nixon money, and I think if you look at the a lot of people would call that a conspiracy that Hoffa was taking money from the Teamsters Union. I think is agreed upon in our history books, but giving it to Nixon is the conspiracy part. Well, why did Nixon pardon Jimmy Hoffa then? That was a weird thing for a lot of people, and they talked about it in newspapers.
There's a PBS program called History Detectives. They did a 2-hour segment on Hoffa's murder, and it's amazing. I've seen lots of disappearance. Yeah. uh, it's an amazing documentary. They spent a lot of time on it, and they got right to the root of the reality of it. They didn't exactly get they got to the tipping point, but didn't tip it. But those who know the story know that they went farther than anybody else. History Detectives, the Hoffa disappearance. You got to see that because what it really nails down is that Nixon was using his knowledge of the assassination to blackmail his co-conspirators. It's like that whole no honor among thieves. They all worked together to kill Kennedy, but they all turned against each other later. No honor among thieves. And Nixon used his knowledge of the Kennedy assassination to gain and maintain his power when he was president. And that's what brought him down. That's the real story of Watergate. And it's the story of Hoffa's disappearance because Hoffa was doing the same thing. When Hoffa got out of prison, he was determined to get the power of the AFL-CIO back. And he was using his knowledge of the real plot to kill Kennedy to blackmail his way back to power. And that's what got him disappeared. So, and they come so close to revealing that in History Detectives in that documentary. But yeah, the whole Hoffa story, all of this will make sense once we resolve the Kennedy assassination. Nixon, but back to Nixon. I recently wrote about the X letter, the X file in the LBJ library. Um, my essay, Why is This Man Laughing? It's all about Nixon and how the LBJ library has this folder of like 80 pages. It was like opened early. It wasn't supposed to be opened for 50 years, which is this year, right? June 26, 2023, it was supposed to be sealed until then. Well, a few years ago, they went ahead and supposedly opened it anyway, but they only revealed a couple of pages of it. And what it did was it showed that Nixon pulled off an October surprise in 68 to prevent peace talks from happening in Vietnam that would have at least stopped temporarily the Vietnam War, which would have helped Johnson's reelection. Nixon wanted none of that, so he sabotaged it uh, through Madame New, and who was on the ground during the Kennedy conspiracy too, uh, uh, and was a cousin of No Dinh Diem, the head of South Vietnam when the war started, who was assassinated, by the way. And so it's about Nixon's plot to sabotage the peace talks in Vietnam, which would have helped Johnson get reelected. Sabotaging it got Nixon elected, and so that came out early. Only a few pages of it, but there's 80 pages of it. You do the research, you find it. There's a big old folder of 80 pages. None of the rest has been released. It was supposed to all been released this year, June 26th, and I counted down the days to that. And you know what happened on June 26th of this year? Nothing. Crickets, silence. And to this day, since then, uh, that was the deed of gift. Johnson gave it to Walt Rostow. Walt Rostow became the head of the collection there because he was the guy who could best oversee and protect all the secrets at the LBJ Library. He was the head of the reading room there and the collection when I had a reading card there and I was going there to do my research. Walt Rostow knew everything I was doing. Every researcher that was there and what they were checking out and what they were doing with it. Reports went back to Rostow's office, which was down the hallway. And one day I found myself on the elevator, just me and Walt Rostow. If you've ever seen the movie 3 Days of the Condor, where Robert Redford is on the elevator with the assassin, that scene always reminds me of riding down that elevator, 8 floors with Walt Rostow. We didn't speak to each other. He glanced at me, I glanced at him. We knew who each other were. He knew who I was, I knew who he was. We didn't say a word, and we quietly left the elevator at the bottom. But that's Walt Rostow, and that's the X envelope, which he was in charge of. He made sure that it would remain sealed. After he died, they went ahead and released those parts of it that blamed Nixon for the October surprise and keeping the Vietnam War going. Even though Nixon was campaigning as a peace candidate, he was going to stop the war. Yeah, see, they lie. Lies by omission, everything else. And so the X envelope was not released. It wasn't even talked about. Even the people who had written about it years ago, there was nothing. There's been absolute silence about the X envelope. I'm the only one that wrote anything about the X envelope. But I went ahead in that essay and I explained that what I think the X envelope documents are about is Nixon's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. LBJ didn't just happen to find. Of course, LBJ was friends with Nixon, or supposedly friends with Nixon, and knew that he knew his involvement in the Kennedy assassination. And this was LBJ's secret file, and he thought he could trust Rostow with it, and of course it was a worthy trust because Rostow kept it secret, was going to keep it secret for 50 years, thought it would be secret for 50 years. And then when parts of it were released, it was just to further taint Nixon, who they're constantly trying to resurrect, by the way. They asked in the Frost interviews with Nixon, the famous, multi-series interviews with Nixon, Frost asked Nixon at one point, how do you think you'll be written about in history? And Nixon's simple answer was, depends on who writes the history. That's a brilliant answer, by the way. It shows his savviness. Depends on who writes the history. And he hasn't gotten away with it. They haven't resurrected Nixon. He got resurrected many times when he was alive, but they haven't managed to resurrect him in death. So that's Nixon. I could go on and on about Nixon. There is evidence of Nixon's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. Really good evidence. It was in Peter Dale Scott's manuscript, The Dallas Conspiracy. And I referenced it and wrote about it in my book. So, and I refer to it in that little essay about the X envelope. I think that's what's in the X envelope, is that more details about Nixon's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. He was a top conspirator. He's at the very top of my list, along with Dulles. The Nixon burger.
His brother opened up a fast food chain or fast food restaurant about serving burgers, and the main thing was the Nixon burger.
Okay. Well, if I ever knew about that, I completely forgot it.
And there was a party, and with all these right wing people that were involved. And when they were handing out, started handing out fortune cookies, and everyone had a good laugh and everything like that. And then you opened up the fortune cookie, and written on the little fortune inside said, "Ask him about the loan." And that was the loan that he got from one of the his brother got a loan from Howard Hughes to do this restaurant. Yeah, so that was interesting. I don't know, but I mean, it's a good story to me. It's interesting. I know everyone goes, "Oh, well, who cares about the Nixon burger?" I'm like, no, it just shows you how politics were going on back then, and obviously there were scandals happening all the time, which I just find it more for historical value interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Um, Howard Hughes, there's another huge area, you know. Yeah, I was around during the 70s when that fake diary came out. Howard Hughes is fascinating to me. The whole Glomar Explorer um, incident and the movie um, Ice Station Zebra, Howard Hughes' favorite movie. That he owned the studio that owned the movie Ice Station Zebra, and he could call up the local TV when he was living in Las Vegas, and he was a recluse. He would feel like watching the movie, and he watched it a lot. It was his favorite movie. He would call up the TV station and have them run the movie that night. Uh, so the story goes that he would set up a projector in his bedroom and watch the movie, but no, I found out that it was that he could just call up the local TV station in Vegas anytime and have them run the movie. So that's how he watched it. But a fascinating movie, by the way. It's a thriller, spy thriller, submarine spy thriller under the Arctic ice, race against the Russians to find a satellite that one of the early satellites that was doing spy photography of Russia. And the Americans are racing against the Russians to get to the crashed satellite so they can recover the film for political reasons. Fantastic. It's a fantastic movie.
If there was an area that you would want researchers to dig into, what would it be when it comes to the Kennedy assassination?
Um, find out
More about Mac Wallace?
find out who is generating. No. All the details. We have enough details. We have
No,
enough
we don't. We
files.
need more details.
You're gonna. My catchphrase is once you have once you have the shoe sizes of every conspirator, what then? Because what's left in the files is shoe sizes. We have we've long had enough evidence to take the battle to the government. Find out where the lies are coming from. That I know where they're coming from. They're coming from the think tanks. Learn everything you can about how a think tank operates, how they write their stuff, what they do on a daily basis, how they get this writing to the media and to the politicians who make the laws and to the media that reports this crap, these lies, and keeps the lies going. Find out how the lie factory works and reverse engineer it. Now, we have a great document. I've talked about this before, CIA document 1035-960. You could just take that. That document is about how the media should lie about researchers and lie about the Kennedy assassination. You can reverse engineer that. We can start there. And the best way to do it is to fight fire with fire. If the lies are coming from a think tank, we have a think tank for truth. That's what I want the research community to concentrate on. We're even after all the truth comes out, we're still going to have conferences because there's a lot of real history that needs to be written. Real historians will have to work on it. And those of us who've already been working on it will have to continue working on it. Conferences will continue. You're not threatening your little bubble of conferences. You're making them official. Uh, you're getting a promotion, possibly a raise when the truth comes out. Uh, those who are last will be first. Those who are first will be last. Just get get the official, get the truth to be official, and going to have to be forced, and we're going to have to figure out it, we're going to have to do the end game. It's like in chess, it's like the end game, and we're going to have to figure out those final moves. But once we figure them out, they can't stop us. It's just like one move after the other, and their position gets worse every time. It's called Zugzwang in chess, where your opponent can't make a single move without putting them in a worse position. And they're pretty much already that way. When they tried this recent Paul Landis thing with finding the bullet in the limo, that made their position so much worse. So everything they try to do, and the 60th anniversary is coming up, and they're going to try all kinds of other new lies. And what I'm going to be watching for is that, are they going to come up with anything that makes their position better, that solidifies the warring? No, Warring Commission is dead and gone. They lost that war. Everything they try will be easily rebutted, easily debunked, and they will end up in a worse position. But we're not forcing them to stop lying. Plausibility is not required. All they have to do is keep telling the lie. That's the way big lies are. That's the definition of a big lie. It doesn't have to make sense. You just have to keep telling it. And as long as you're allowed to keep telling it, of course you're going to keep telling it. We have to stop allowing them to tell the big lie. That's where I want the research community to concentrate. Whatever other files come out, and we have a lot of the files that they reclassified. I've said this before. I know the researchers who have them, and they're supposedly writing books, and they're being very quiet and very background and very, recluse about it. But I know who they are, I know where they are, I know what they got. And they have files that are supposed to be classified and that were unclassified before, and they gathered them up way back in the early 90s and kept them. And they're going to, we have them. They're going to be fine, let's find the shoe sizes of all the conspirators. But at some point we have to ask ourselves, now what? All right. Everything that comes out puts the official position, the Oswald did it, puts that a position in worse, puts our position in a better place. Every file that comes out proves the conspiracy. It always has. So you want to go get more files? Guess what it's going to prove? It's going to prove the conspiracy over and over and over. How many times do you have to prove the conspiracy? Let's just stop the lies, and we don't have to do anything after that. It all just happens. And, so that's where I'm going to stay focused.
Well, Rich, where can people find your links, man?
My blog, it's called Bartholomew's, and it's at Substack, bartholomews.substack.com. And hopefully soon I'm going to have more time to, keep writing. I got a lot of new essays on there, but I go through these long hiatuses. So, but when you're my age, day jobs don't last forever. So I will be getting back. And I'm still going to digitize that transcript I've got between John Newman, Bill Turner, Gus Russo, where they revealed the identity of, or at least to me and that people in that room, the workshop at one of the ASK conferences about Mary Bancroft and Ruth Payne's connection and Michael Payne's family connection to Dulles and his mistress, Mary Bancroft. That transcript of that workshop was so good about that. And they also, in that workshop, they go into finding Oswald's double living in Florida, running a print shop. His name is Don Norton. And Bill Kelly has written about this on his blog, but it's a totally believable story. A guy came up in an audience. Mae Brussel was giving a speech in Columbus. And the guy comes up to her after the speech, and he looks exactly like Lee Harvey Oswald. And he introduces himself and says, I'm the other Oswald. I'm the Oswald that was replaced in Dealey Plaza. And Bill Kelly was there, John Judge was there, and Mae Brussel were there, and they all met him. And then in later years, John Armstrong and Jack White tracked him down. And anyway, so that's why I want to get that transcript up. So stay tuned for more stuff on my blog.
I'm going to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast. Stay tuned for next episode.